Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Everstream Analytics Weekly Supply Chain Overview webinar for today, Tuesday, October the 12th. My name is Mark Russo, Chief Science Officer, and I'm joined by John Davis, Chief Meteorologist. Let me hand things over to John, who will start things off today with what's ahead for this week.
Thanks, Mark. Good day, everybody. So as we look ahead to this week, there was actually some debate as to what the overall risk score was. Because there are only regional issues concentrated mainly in the western portion of the country and no issues in the eastern US, this week's risk score was green, meaning that we do not see any major disruptions that would have any kind of significant ramifications within the supply chain network across the US and areas near the US. But there was some debate in this, and we'll take a look at some of the regional items, which again, are all concentrated in the western portion of the US. The East is very clear. It's very open. There's really no issues there. So if we look at now and going into the air cargo airports, so these are all the major air cargo locations. And as you can see, all the major airports do not have any kind of high risk going forward. We did have high risk last week up in Anchorage, Alaska. This week, no high risk at any of the major airports. The same story is true for the major port operations across North America. Again, no high risk assets or no high risk ports across any location across North America. Finally, the intermodal hub network. We do have some high risk here. In fact, we have 7 intermodal hubs that are at high risk. All of that is in the middle portion of the country, in areas of the Midwest and plains and portions of the Rockies. And if we look at the overall list of the 7 intermodal hubs, you can see the location of those intermodal hubs across the US. It basically extends from the Minneapolis area back over to the Intermountain region here in the Rockies and portions of Wyoming. And it's all in that area. And it is all due to one thing. It is wind gusts across those locales, and the wind gust, the timing of that looks to be over the next couple of days. One of the intermodal hubs in Minneapolis is actually scoring 25. So we did want to take a look at the details of that overall parameter and that intermodal hub. So this is looking at Minneapolis now. It's a very short period of time when you're having this kind of high risk. It's actually tomorrow afternoon, local time, Wednesday afternoon. And there are indications of wind gusts to be in the range of 55 to 60 miles per hour during that period. Now, the high risk is only 3 to 4 hours in duration on Wednesday afternoon, but it is at levels across that intermodal hub that is scoring high risk. In fact, the highest risk at a 25 on the 1 to 25 scale for that period tomorrow afternoon. Once you get past tomorrow, it's all clear in that region, as well as the other areas across the central and western US, as it's quite quiet across those locales here coming up, with no other additional high risk and not even any medium risk or moderate risk coming up as we go through the remainder of this week and on into next week. Let's look at the issue of the wind gusts across the North America and looking at the overall kind of trends coming up. This map depicts the peak wind gusts that any location will tend to have over the next 7-day period. So whatever that highest wind gust is, that is what is portrayed on this map. And you can see why that the high risk for the intermodal hubs are all across the Midwest, plains, and portions of the Rockies. There's kind of the swath from Minnesota back down into the Southern Rockies, where you tend to have the highest gust across those locales. Almost all of this, the timing of it, it's over the next 2 to 3 days across the region. It is due to 2 frontal systems that will be pushing across that zone. And that is the mechanism that is producing these high wind gusts across those locales. And as you can see on the key at the bottom, that there will be areas that see wind gusts in the 50s, even possibly 60s within that high wind gust zone or corridor from the Midwest down into the southern portion of the Rockies. Compare that to the eastern US, areas from Chicago to the East Coast, where overall here it's very quiet. And in a place like Florida, it's almost a calm week here coming up across those areas. Again, all the issues are across the western portion of the country here coming up. There's another area on this map that's noteworthy, and that is on the west coast of Mexico, a small but intense area of high winds, and that is due to Hurricane Pamela. So let's take a look at that. Hurricane Pamela formed here yesterday, and it formed out of a weak area of low pressure and tropical wave that did rapidly intensify here yesterday. As of right now, Hurricane Pamela has maximum sustained winds of 80 miles an hour, may strengthen a little bit prior to landfall. And again, landfall looks to be tonight on the west coast of Mexico, kind of just to the south and southeast of the Cabo area in Mexico. And it's a relatively small storm, so your area of impact is quite small. But there are some operations across that area that certainly will be impacted. Now, this is a very mountainous area of Mexico, so much of the rain, and there will be very heavy rains and thus some flash flooding and mudslides across the region. But those higher mountains will tend to squeeze or force much of the moisture out of the system as it does push across the western portion of Mexico. So by the time it makes it up into Texas, the remnants of the storm will have some rain, but nothing terribly heavy. And all the winds will pretty much be worked out of the system here or be dissipated by the time it moves up into Texas. So this is not a threatening situation in Texas. It is a threatening situation in the western portion of Mexico. And there is one port in the pathway of Pamela. So let's take a look at some of the specifics of what's going to be happening at that port here coming up. And it is the port of Mazatlan. The port of Mazatlan is actually due east of Cabo San Lucas in Mexico, and it's the only significant port in that range. There's not a huge population basis across the region, but port operations there will be impacted to a pretty high degree. And if we look at some of the details, and it's going to be tomorrow morning local time where you do begin to see the highest wind gusts across that area. And overall here coming up, that is the beginning of this high risk hurricane environment, which again starts tonight, goes through the day tomorrow. And because of some of the strong winds and extremely heavy rainfall across the region, will extend into a portion of Thursday. So with the winds here, and you're going to be looking at overall winds extremely strong across those areas, about 9 inches of rainfall along with that here coming up. And the bottom line here right now is that certainly tomorrow is going to be a day where you'll likely have significant disruptions within that relatively small area. This is not one of the biggest ports across Mexico, but nonetheless, it is a port across those areas that does do some pretty much overall movement within the supply chain across those locales. So any kind of products that are going in and out of the port of Mazatlan will certainly have some issues here coming up across those locales within that zone here. And again, that's during the day tomorrow. And by the time we get to the end of the week and over the weekend, it's pretty much all clear across those locales here coming up. So that's kind of the Mexican story here today. The next story that we'll talk about is looking at snow across areas of the western US. So time of year when you begin getting some snow across portions of the US, especially in the higher elevations of the West. And this is the first significant snowfall of the season across portions of the Northern Rockies. And again, we're looking at the snowfall forecast over the next 7-day period. but most of the snow is falling now and will continue to fall into tomorrow and very early on Thursday. So this is happening as we speak, and these disruptions within the transportation network there then will tend to be over the next 2 or 3 days. And as you can see, some of the projected accumulations of snowfall. And again, a lot of this will be higher elevations, but even in the lower elevations, some areas will tend to get as much as 10 or 12 inches, with some higher elevations, getting a foot or two as we go through the next couple of days across the region. Certainly at levels that will cause disruptions to transportation across those areas, including road and rail transportation across those locales. Once we get past the next 2 or 3 days, the end of the week, over the weekend, into next week, looks quite quiet across the West, as well as all areas of the lower 48. So as we look at things over the next week or two, this looks to be the only significant snow event and the only major winter storm disruptor as we go through the next couple of days across those locales. So let's broaden things out and look at the entire picture. And certainly one of the takeaways here today is that all the regional issues that are taking place, they're all out west. There's nothing east of the Mississippi River or in the eastern half of the country. It is very quiet on all parameters across the eastern US, with no disruptions here from a weather standpoint upcoming across those locales. And again, the West has these regional issues. The winter storm that we just talked about. We do have a continuation of enhanced fire risk across California. That's especially true over the next couple of days. Areas of the plains have a severe weather threat here today. Some thunderstorms may be enough to produce some hail, even possibly some isolated tornadoes. That's mainly today and tonight across the region. And further south, actually, we've seen some pretty heavy rains across portions of Texas. And because of that, there are some flash flood watches out across those locales with those rains, and also some of the remnants of Pamela, which will be moving up into those regions. But again, all the issues, all the disruptions are regional, and they're all concentrated across the western portion of the US, whereas the eastern US is all clear and no issues whatsoever this week or even looking out into next week. So that's the North American story. We'll turn it over to Mark now, and he'll take a look at some of the global highlights. Mark?
Thanks, John. One quick housekeeping item. If you do have any questions, you can use the Q&A tool, type in your question, and we will answer them here at the end of the presentation. So I want to cover here really with the global hazards that we see coming up over the next week. There's really two main areas where there's a bit of a higher concentration of medium or high risk supply chain nodes that likely see disruptions. One of those areas is East Asia, especially focused in southern China, the far northern Philippines, and northern Vietnam. That is due to tropical activity there. And then the other area of note is down across South Africa, and that is due to increased storminess over the next several days that looks to disrupt really, shipping and vessel movement across those areas. I want to talk first the details here with our East Asia potential disruptions. And as I mentioned earlier, this is due to tropical activity. And we currently have two named storms out in the Western Pacific. One is Tropical Storm Namthian, located here northeast of Guam. That will not be any disruption to any land areas. Some minor impacts to shipping lanes, but Tropical Storm Namthian is not any kind of significant risk. The risk storm of note is Tropical Storm Kompasu. And already we've seen impacts across areas of the northern Philippines and some extended or outer reaches of impacts here from Kompasu and Taiwan, and that is due to heavier rainfall across the region. And that is really the main threat with Kompasu coming up Over the next few days, it looks to remain tropical storm strength. It's not out of the question. It briefly reaches Category 1 typhoon strength, but all in all, tropical storm winds are forecast along its path. But the bigger item is the heavy rainfall and flood risk across these areas of East and Southeast Asia. Taking a closer look at our watchtower for Tropical Storm Kompasu, our watchtower we initially issued back on October 7th as awareness. We then upgraded it to high impact here and high risk earlier on Monday. And our current zone of risk here extends from near Hong Kong on the northern part of the zone over to then northern Vietnam and the western portion of the zone. And while previously northern Philippines were included in the zone, that is now, they are no longer in the zone as the storm has tracked further out into the South China Sea as it makes its westward advancement towards Hainan province in China and the northern portion of Vietnam. Within this zone of higher risk impact, we are tracking 8 supply chain nodes, kind of a combination of major cities, operation centers and industry centers there across the region, and then also some key ports and airports. The 2 primary ports within that zone include the port of Hong Kong, as well as the port of Shenzhen. Also, Hong Kong International Airport is in the zone of higher risk here. And already we've seen impacts here at the port of Hong Kong. In fact, it's been reported that the port that the port has ceased container handling operations as of earlier today. And the main threat of wind and rain with causing disruptions here at the port is going to continue throughout the day today and then on into the early portion of tomorrow as well. So with some ceasing of operations there, that looks to continue probably for another 24 hours or so before conditions improve there at the port. And then no other, at least systems look to impact specifically the port of Hong Kong throughout the remainder of the week. After the storm tracks or impacts Hong Kong, it does look to, again, move into northern Vietnam. And northern Vietnam does include some key tech and manufacturing facilities across the region. There's also agriculture, including some coffee production there, rubber production, and this area already has been hit by heavy rainfall due to Tropical Storm Lion Rock back last week. And so that zone across northern Vietnam will continue to see high risk of major rainfall and flooding that would disrupt supply chain networks and business operations here this week. But all in all, that is the main impact zone at this time. Our next area of note is South Africa, where I mentioned before, there is a medium to high risk of disruptions to vessel movement and shipping in and around the Cape of Good Hope, as well as some of the ports across South Africa. That of higher winds coming up at the Cape of Good Hope. As you can see here in our risk timeline for the Cape of Good Hope, that is coming up later on October 13th and into the 14th, where there is about a 12-hour window of gusty wind exceed 80 kilometers per hour. And again, that's enough to cause slowdowns and vessel movement across the region. We don't expect those types of winds specifically at some of the port operations across the region. But all in all, with the next several days featuring these stormy conditions, again, that's enough to slow down any shipments there across the region, which is atypical at this time of year. It is early spring across the southern hemisphere, still a continuation of stormy conditions at times. And this week is going to be one of those classic stormy weeks there in and around the southern portion of Africa. And then finally, we did want to briefly cover Europe, where bottom line there is that we do not expect any major disruptions from a weather or environmental risk coming up over the next week or so. As you see here, all the major cities as well as roads, the vast majority are scoring low or low risk, a few that are at medium risk. And the only high is the port of Piraeus in Greece, and that is due to a major earthquake that occurred earlier today. In fact, that earthquake here in the system is 6.4 magnitude here out in the Mediterranean Sea, but close enough that that could be causing some disruptions here at the port, and even the risk of some aftershocks that could cause some additional issues there. But that is the only high risk asset or supply chain node across Europe and even on into North Africa and the western portion of Russia. Lastly, want to cover just the temperature situation here with some of the first wintry areas of the western U.S. And as we look ahead for the next 7 days, much of the western U.S. still colder biased with some colder air that's moved into the region. And but though eastern half of the country will be biased on the warmer side, and it's actually this differential in temperatures which is causing the very windy conditions and also some of the storminess across the western and central portion of the country. So this is the main temperature profile between now and October 18th. However, it does not look to last much beyond that. In fact, looking at the 2-week forecast of temperature departures from normal, the main theme here is going to be the northern biased warmth during next week. Still a little bit of lingering coolness across the southwestern portion of the country, but all in all, a kind of a return to more seasonal levels across the west and then portions of the southern U.S. But no sign of, again, of any significant cold weather moving into the eastern half of the country, looking out basically from now through almost the end of the month. Now, with our temperature profile here, especially for this week, with the colder than normal temperatures, we are going to see more widespread freezing conditions around. In fact, as far south as areas of the Four Corners region, and then some of the higher elevations across the Rockies, we'll see temperatures dropping below 15 degrees. But as you go east of there, moving away from the high plains, no freezing temperatures are expected. In fact, it's not even going to be close across areas of the Midwest and even on into the Northeast, where at this time of year, it's much easier to get freezing temperatures. In fact, we're kind of at the normal window for kind of the first freeze in areas of the north central and northeastern portion of the U.S. But certainly this fall, it's shaping up to be a season that features a much later than normal freeze across much of the eastern half of the country. In terms of our PFF analysis here for interstates, with the colder temperatures out west, there will be 5 interstates where the predicted temperatures will be below or colder than 15 degrees. There's an increase of 4 interstates from a week ago, but those are the 4 primary lanes. As for medium risk interstates, we're tracking 7 that will be dropping below 32, but will remain colder than 15. And then lastly, still the overwhelming majority of lanes, 58 of them, will be warmer than 32. So no protection from freeze requirements will be needed across, again, much of the central and eastern US. One kind of final highlight, I-15, that is the highest number of miles that will see temperatures below 15 degrees. So taking a quick look at the lane analysis, again, with the coldest temperatures, and then as John mentioned, the very wintry conditions with snow and wind, that's primarily the next 3 days across the region. So overall, if you have shipments moving across I-15, at least the biggest risk here in the coldest time frame is the next 3 to 4 days. So that is when PFF requirements will be needed. And then also you can expect snow and wind disruptions for truck movement and overall shipments moving across the area. After that, things do look to improve, but again, temperatures will be still dropping below 32, just not as cold as what's going to take place the next 3 to 4 days. But certainly that is the most noteworthy interstate in terms of wintry conditions here coming up. So overall, again, our national risk this week is green, and still some, again, regional items, but not expecting any kind of major environmental disruptions here that would cause the national risk to either become orange or red. And that's even true across the globe too. Again, some regional items, but no major or extreme disruptions expected from a global standpoint. We did have one question here come in, and the question reads, is there any data on disruptions related to the airlines beginning to strike? Good question here. Our company does investigate that type of data in terms of what we call incidents out there. Some of the incidents is related to weather conditions, but then also any kind of incidents, whether it's industry related, whether it's socio or infrastructure issues, and that that data is included in the platform. We'll be happy to follow up with you with more specifics on that data, and we will reach out to you after this presentation with more specifics here with your question. Don't see any other questions that have come in. No. So yeah, we'll wrap things up here. Again, for any more details on the risks and threats that we discussed here today, those risks and threats to your supply chain networks and operations, please log into your Everstream account. To learn more about our solutions or request a demo, again, please visit our website. And thank you for attending today's Everstream Analytics Weekly Supply Chain Overview webinar. Have a great day and week.
Thanks, everybody.